You think you know a story about the Old West. You think it's about dust and gold and gunslingers with no names. But you're wrong. This story is about a man who lost everything to a river and the three women who would either be his salvation or his final damnation. And it all started on a day so hot the devil himself would have been looking for shade in a town called Redemption Springs. The auction block was made of splintered pine, and it baked in the merciless sun. A crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and casual cruelty. They weren't here for cattle or horses. They were here for human beings. Three women were shoved onto the platform. Their hands were bound in iron shackles that clinked with a sound like broken promises. They were Native American, their buckskin clothes a world away from the dusty cotton of the townsfolk. But it wasn't their clothes that set them apart. It was their posture, backs straight, chins high, eyes that held no fear. The oldest had a scar that cut a silver line down her cheek, a roadmap of a life I couldn't imagine. The one in the middle, built like a warrior, scanned the crowd with pure, undiluted contempt, and the youngest, barely a woman, stared at the distant mountains, as if the peaks themselves were whispering secrets of survival. "3 squaws!" the auctioneer bellowed, the slur rolling off his tongue like spit. "Captured from one of them savage tribes up north. Good for housework, farm work, whatever work you need done." A few men snickered. The implication hung in the air, thick and foul as stagnant water. $50 for the lot, someone shouted. $75. The oldest woman's eyes swept the crowd, slow and searching. They were dark, ancient, and held a wisdom that made the hair on my arms stand up. And then her eyes locked with mine. "My name is Ethan Blackwood. I'm just a rancher. A hermit, some folks call me. I hadn't come for the auction. I was just in town for supplies, minding my own business. But now I couldn't look away." Her gaze wasn't a plea. It was a challenge, a question, and something about it stirred a memory, buried so deep I thought it was dead. A memory of water and chaos and a pain that had carved out my soul. Around her neck, she wore an ornament. From the back of the crowd, I couldn't quite make it out, but it tugged at that memory, tightening a knot in my chest. The bidding crawled to $100. Then a new voice, slick and confident, sliced through the murmuring crowd. 200. Clayton Reed stepped forward, the wealthiest man in 3 counties, dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to laugh at the town's dust. His gold watch chain gleamed in the sun. 200, he repeated, with a smile that never touched his cold, dead eyes. For the young one only. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The 3 women shuffled closer, a small, defiant fortress of 3. The auctioneer stammered, They're being sold as a group, Mr. Reed." "Then 300 for all 3, Reed snapped, his patience gone. The oldest woman's gaze flickered back to me, just for a second. An entire lifetime seemed to pass in that glance, and without knowing why, without even thinking, I started moving. Each step through that crowd felt like I was wading through thick mud, both a struggle and an inevitability. When I reached the front, the whole town staring at me, I slowly pulled the gold pocket watch from my vest. It was my father's watch, the last thing I had of him, the last remnant of the Blackwood family. I held it up. The polished gold caught the sun, a tiny star in my calloused hand. "I'll buy them." The world went silent. The only sound was the lonely howl of a prairie wind. The auctioneer stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "Mr. Blackwood? I don't understand." "The watch is worth at least $500, I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I'm offering it for the 3 women." Reed turned, his face darkening, as he finally recognized the town hermit. "Well, if it isn't the ghost of Blackwood Ranch," he sneered. "Didn't know you had an interest in this sort of commodity." I ignored him. I kept my eyes on the auctioneer, who looked like a trapped rabbit caught between a wolf and a bear. 550, Reed countered, his voice dripping with contempt. I didn't flinch. "The watch," I repeated, "and 200 in cash." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wad of bills. It was nearly everything I had, my entire world right there in my hands. Reed opened his mouth to bid again, but he stopped. He studied my face, his eyes narrowing, trying to figure out my angle. What he saw, I'll never know. But after a long, tense moment, he shrugged. A grand, dismissive gesture. Let him have them. I was merely being charitable. He turned away, but not before firing one last shot over his shoulder. Your father would be disappointed, Blackwood. The barb hit its mark, but I didn't let it show. I placed the watch and the money into the auctioneer's trembling hands. The deal was done. I walked to the platform. The three women watched me, their faces guarded, their eyes unreadable. What had I just done? I'd traded my past for a future I couldn't even begin to comprehend. You're free to go, I told them, my voice hoarse. I wasn't even sure if they understood English. But if you want, you can come with me. I have a ranch. It's a safe place. The oldest woman, the one with the ancient eyes, never looked away from my face. As the sheriff stepped forward with the keys to their shackles, my gaze fell again to the ornament around her neck. And this time, I saw it clearly. It was a necklace adorned with faded gray squirrel tails. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Because 5 years ago, after the flood had stolen my father and destroyed my world, I had seen a necklace just like that. Not on an auction block, not on a woman in chains, but on the shadowy figure who had pulled my half-dead body from the raging water. I didn't just see a necklace. I saw the ghost of the day my life was destroyed. The wagon ride to Blackwood Ranch was 10 miles of thick, suffocating silence. I handled the reins, my knuckles white. The three women sat in the back, a silent council of judges, their dignity a stark rebuke to the squalor of the auction. Every now and then, I'd feel her eyes on me. The oldest one. Naeli, I would later learn she was called. She was studying me, assessing me, maybe trying to figure out if she'd made a mistake letting me buy them. As the dusty streets of Redemption Springs gave way to rolling hills, my mind kept getting dragged back. 5 years ago, to the storm that came from nowhere. It wasn't just rain, it was a biblical deluge. The creek that normally gave life to our ranch turned into a monster, a roaring brown serpent devouring everything in its path. My father, Robert Blackwood, and I were trying to move cattle to higher ground. A spooked horse, a flash of lightning, a sickening crack. Dad went down, his ribs shattered. I got him on my shoulders, fighting through the rising water. The house was right there, just up the slope. We were so close, and then the ground just dissolved beneath my feet. One moment I was staggering forward, the weight of my father a sacred burden. The next, the world was a nightmare of water and mud and the sound of my own screaming. The current ripped him from my grasp. I never saw him again. I managed to grab a floating plank. That flimsy piece of wood was the only thing between me and the hereafter. For hours, maybe days, I drifted in a fever dream. Sun, rain, wind, silence. I passed out, woke up, passed out again. My leg was on fire, a piece of barbed wire twisted deep in the muscle. I was bleeding, starving, dying. When I finally opened my eyes for what I thought would be the last time, I wasn't in the water. I was lying in a forest hollow, next to a small, warm fire. My leg was wrapped in woven bark and poultices of thick, strange-smelling leaves. A hide was draped over me. 3 figures moved in the firelight. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but their hands were firm, practiced. They weren't cruel. They spoon-fed me broth. They cleaned my wound. They saved my life. And the memory that haunted me most, the one that surfaced in my darkest nightmares, was the ornaments they wore. Necklaces adorned with squirrel tails, just like the one Nellie wore. I pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "This is it," I said, my voice rough. The women exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. Then Nellie slid down from the wagon bed, not waiting for my help. The other 2 followed, the warrior, Kiona, and the young one, Ayana. Up close, I could see the intricate tattoos on their forearms, the beads woven into Naeli's hair. "You can stay in the cabin," I said, pointing to a small but solid building down by the creek. It was for the ranch hands before I started doing everything myself, before the ranch fell silent. "It's yours now." Nellie's eyes followed my gesture, then snapped back to my face. Her expression was still unreadable, but she gave a single subtle nod. I led them inside. It was simple. Beds, a hearth, a table. I'd stocked it with basic provisions. Fresh water in the creek, I said, miming drinking. Food here. I pointed to the shelves. Kiona, the warrior, immediately began inspecting every corner, every window, every possible way out. Iana went straight to the cold hearth, kneeling and running her hands over the stones, as if greeting an old friend. But Nellie just stood in the center of the room, her eyes locked on me. Then very deliberately, she touched the squirrel tail necklace at her throat. Then she pointed at me. It wasn't a statement. It was a question that had been screaming in my mind for 5 long years. My throat was tight. Yes, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I remember. She nodded slowly, and then she spoke, her voice low and steady, in perfect, slightly accented English. We hoped you would. But she didn't just confirm it. She then pointed to a long, jagged scar on my forearm, a souvenir from the barbed wire. Then with her other hand, she pushed back the leather bracelet on her own wrist. And there, on her skin, was a faded, swirling mark. A tattoo or a brand, I couldn't tell. But it was the exact same shape as my scar. Not a scar, she said, her eyes boring into mine. A sign. The next morning I found them sitting outside the cabin. Kiona was sharpening a stick into a crude but effective-looking spear. Iana was humming softly, weaving wildflowers into a small crown. Nellie was just watching the sun rise, as if she did it every day of her life. I brought them a basket of food, fresh bread, smoked venison, apples. My name is Ethan, I said, touching my chest. Nellie took an apple, studying it before taking a crisp bite. She swallowed, then touched her own chest. Nellie, she pointed to the warrior. Kiona, then to the youngest. Ayana. It's good to meet you properly, I said, a small, weary smile touching my lips. Nellie's expression remained serious, but something in her eyes softened. She touched her squirrel tail necklace again. You remember us. The flood, I confirmed. You saved me. She nodded. Then she spoke in her native tongue, a flowing, melodic language. Kiona responded sharply, gesturing at me with suspicion. Naeli replied calmly, and whatever she said seemed to placate her sister, at least for now. You are safe here, I told them. No one will harm you at Blackwood Ranch. Nellie studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Safe, she repeated the word, testing it. Then her eyes flicked down to my arm, to the scar, and back to the matching mark on her own wrist. She saw me looking and covered it quickly. Why did you help me? I asked, the question that had burned in me for years. A white man, an intruder. All life is sacred, she said simply. But that is not the only reason. She took a deep breath. When we found you, you were already between worlds, dying. Our herbs, our care, it wasn't enough. My blood ran cold. Then how? There is a place, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. A sacred place, deep in the mountains. The water that flows there, it is not ordinary water. It is life. It is healing. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. It sounded like a fantasy, a folktale. We brought you water from the sacred spring, she continued. It healed your wound. It called your spirit back from the edge of the great darkness. It saved you. The revelation was staggering. Not just tribal medicine, but something else. Something that defied explanation. That's why you have the mark? I asked, pointing to her wrist. All who are touched by the sacred water are marked, she confirmed. It leaves a sign, a connection. Her eyes locked onto my scar. The water recognizes its own. We were connected. Me, the hermit rancher, and this woman from a world I couldn't comprehend, bound together by some mystical spring. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Because the man who bought us at the auction, she said, her voice turning hard as stone. Clayton Reed. He is not just a cruel man, he is a hunter. A hunter? For what? Nellie's gaze grew distant, filled with a pain that looked ancient. Our people are lost, scattered. Bad men came to our sacred land. With guns, with sickness. Reed's men. They forced us to run. We were separated, captured. Her eyes blazed with a new fire. Reed does not want gold from our mountains. He has heard the stories. He hunts for the sacred water. It all clicked into place. The auction, Reed's desire for the young one. He wasn't just buying workers. He was buying information. He was buying keys to a treasure beyond measure. He wants to find it, I said, the words tasting like ash. Yes, she said. He believes it can be bottled, sold. He wants to own the source of life itself, and he will destroy anyone and anything that stands in his way. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of this new reality. My personal debt of gratitude had just exploded into something far bigger, far more dangerous. And he's already captured more of your people, I stated, the pieces falling into a grim picture. Nellie nodded slowly. Our mother, Makawi, the heart of our tribe, the one who knows the deepest secrets of the water. We believe he holds her, somewhere hidden. He tortures her, trying to force her to lead him to the spring. Before I could even react to this horrifying news, a new thought struck me, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. If this water is so powerful, I asked, my voice trembling slightly, what happens if a man like Reed gets his hands on it? Nellie looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her ancient eyes. The water gives life, she whispered, but for a man with a corrupt heart, it can also give power. Power to twist, to control, to destroy. She looked toward the distant mountains where her home lay hidden. If he controls the spring, he controls everything. 3 days passed. An uneasy truce settled over the ranch. Kiona remained a silent, watchful shadow. Ayana, I learned, had a gift with plants, and she spent hours in my neglected vegetable garden, coaxing life back into the soil. And Naili, she watched me. She followed me as I did my chores, observing, learning. We spoke little, but a silent understanding was growing between us. On the fourth morning, I found a small, exquisitely carved wooden hawk on my porch, a peace offering. You made this? I asked as Nayeli appeared at the bottom of the steps. She nodded. The hawk, I murmured. My father always said our family was descended from hawks, sharp-eyed, patient. I looked at her, a new question forming. You kept this? From when you found me? Yes, she said, to remember the man from the water. That Sunday I hitched the wagon. It was a ritual going to church, a habit I'd kept since my father's death. As I was about to climb aboard, Nayeli approached. I come, she said. I was stunned. To church? Are you sure? The people in town, they won't be kind. Not first unkindness, she replied with a dignity that shamed my caution. Won't be last. She was right. The moment we pulled into the churchyard, conversation stopped. Whispers started. People stared as if I'd brought a wolf into their flock. I helped her down, my hand on her elbow, a small act of defiance. Ignore them, I said quietly. Always do, she replied, her chin held high. Reverend Sullivan was a good man. He greeted Nayeli with a warm, genuine smile, showing no judgment, only curiosity. All are welcome in God's house, he said, and I believed he meant it. But as we stepped inside, I saw him, Clayton Reed, standing near the front, surrounded by the town's most important men. His eyes narrowed when he saw Nayeli, and he leaned over to whisper something to Sheriff Tanner. We sat in the back, but I could feel the weight of every eye in that room on us. The wealthy man, Nellie said quietly, nodding towards Reed. He wanted my sisters for a bad purpose. Reed thinks he owns this county, I muttered back. The people in it, too. Men like him everywhere, she observed. Different clothes, same eyes. Reverend Sullivan's sermon was about the Good Samaritan. The timing was so perfect it had to be intentional. He spoke of compassion, of helping strangers, of looking past our differences. Nellie listened, her expression thoughtful, but the moment the service ended, the peace was shattered. Reed strode towards us, Sheriff Tanner and 2 other men flanking him like well-dressed hounds. Blackwood, Reed said, his voice slick with false cordiality, bringing some local color to our Sunday service? Ms. Nayeli wanted to attend, I said, stepping slightly in front of her. The Reverend welcomes all. Indeed I do, Sullivan said, joining us. Reed's smile tightened. I'm just concerned about our town's standards, Reverend. We've had trouble with savages before. The only savagery I've witnessed lately was at the auction block, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Reed's face flushed with anger. Those women were prisoners. Their tribe has been raiding settlements up north. That is a lie, Nayeli said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring church like a knife. Every head turned. My people are peaceful. We run from fights, not start them. Reed, momentarily shocked that she spoke English, recovered quickly. Well, well, it talks. He turned to Ethan. You've brought a threat into our community, Blackwood. The only threat I see is standing right in front of me, I shot back. The tension crackled, a spark away from a fire. Reverend Sullivan stepped between us. Gentlemen, this is God's house. No need to continue, Reed said, his eyes still locked on me. I've made my point. He turned to leave, then paused, delivering his parting shot. Oh, and Blackwood? Your property taxes are due next month. I'd hate to see you lose that ranch over a simple oversight. The threat was clear. Reed held the mortgages on half the properties in the county. He could ruin me. He could take the ranch, and with it, he would take them. He planned to ruin me financially, taking the ranch and the women with it. That night, a storm blew in. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. The sound of it dragged me back into the nightmare. Rushing water, my father's weight slipping away. Darkness. But this time, the dream was different. Through the chaos, I heard a song, a low melodic chant in a language I didn't know. I felt hands steady and warm on my brow. I tasted a cool liquid on my lips, a taste of earth and sky. I jerked awake, gasping, my shirt soaked in sweat. The dream had been so real. And through the sound of the storm, I thought I could still hear the song. A flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. A figure standing in the heart of the deluge, her face turned up to the storm-tossed sky. Nayeli! I threw on my coat and ran out onto the porch. Nayeli, what are you doing? Come inside. She turned, her expression serene. The storm speaks, she called back. I must listen. I led her back inside, dripping and shivering. I stoked the fire and put on a pot of coffee. I gave her some of my dry clothes, which hung on her small frame like a scarecrow's. We sat at the kitchen table, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling inside. What message did you receive? I asked, trying to sound casual. Her dark eyes met mine. Danger ahead, she said, but also truth. She paused, her gaze intense. Your dream, the water, the song, you remembered. I stiffened. How did you know what I dreamed? The same dream came to me, she said simply. I told you, the water connects us. The idea was insane, a psychic bond forged by mystical water. But as I looked at her, at the quiet certainty in her eyes, I couldn't dismiss it. The mark on my arm seemed to tingle, to burn with a strange, cold fire. The water connects us, she repeated, but it also makes us vulnerable. If Reed finds the spring, if he desecrates it with his greed, the connection will break. For all who are marked, it will bring a pain you cannot imagine. For some, it will bring death. My blood ran cold. You would die? Your sisters? Perhaps, she admitted. The connection is strong in some, weaker in others. But all who drank would suffer. She looked directly at my scarred forearm. Including you. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. This wasn't just about helping her people anymore. My life, my very survival, was now tied to the fate of a sacred spring I had never even seen. My own life was on the line. Why did you really come here tonight? I asked, my voice low. To see if the man who gives the hawk carving is still here, she said, her voice soft but direct. Under the fear, under the pain. Tomorrow we must begin the search for my people. I needed to know if the man who rides with me is a man who hides from the world or a man who is ready to fight for it. She stood and placed her hand over my heart. The warmth of her touch seemed to seep right through my shirt, a small island of heat in the cold, stormy night. The man who gives the hawk is the man we need. The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean. Before the sun was even a rumor in the east, I was packing supplies. We had to move, and we had to move now. As I worked, I heard hoofbeats. It was Reverend Sullivan. His face was grim. "Trouble, Ethan," he said without preamble. "Reed called a town council meeting after you left. He's whipped them into a frenzy. Convinced them Nayeli and her sisters are scouts for a raiding party." "It's a lie," I growled. "Of course it is," Sullivan agreed. "But it's a lie that serves his purpose. He's using it as an excuse. Sheriff Tanner is bringing a posse out here today to inspect your property." "By which he means arrest them and hand them over to Reed," I finished for him. "Exactly. Then we'll be gone before they get here." Sullivan nodded. "I thought you might say that." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Take this. It's a detailed map of the Northern Territories. I've marked the locations of several of Reed's so-called mining operations. It might be a place to start looking for Nayeli's people." He also pointed to a remote spot high in the mountains. "And this is a place I've heard whispers about, an old trading post Reed has fortified, a place to keep something or someone valuable." Nellie's mother, Makawi. "Reverend, why are you doing this?" I asked. "You're risking everything." "Because 20 years of preaching about the Good Samaritan doesn't mean a thing if I stand by and do nothing when my neighbor's in peril," he said. He turned to leave. "Be careful, Ethan. Reed doesn't make idle threats." Within the hour we were gone. Me, Nayeli, Kiona, and Ayana, riding north on horseback, leaving the quiet, lonely life I had known behind. We rode into the true wilderness, a land of towering pines and hidden valleys. This was their world, and here Nayeli seemed to come alive. "Home," she said, a single word that held a universe of meaning. That night, as we camped under a blanket of stars so bright they felt close enough to touch, Nellie pointed to the map. "Tomorrow we reach the place of the first sign." Just as she said it, a twig snapped in the darkness. Instantly, Kiona was on her feet, spear in hand. I grabbed my rifle. The silence of the forest was suddenly alive, humming with unseen threats. We waited, our hearts pounding, until a deer stepped into the firelight, looked at us with wide, liquid eyes, and then bounded away. The tension broke, but the feeling remained. "We are not alone," Nellie murmured, "never alone in the sacred lands." The next morning we found it. In a small, sun-dappled clearing, a weathered tree stump stood like an altar. Woven into it were bones, feathers, and squirrel tails, a sacred marker. Kiona let out a sharp cry and pointed to the base of the stump. Beneath the earth, wrapped in oilskin, was a folded piece of paper. A letter. It was written in English, in a neat, educated hand. "You read," Nally said, handing it to me. "My name is Daniel Wilson," it began. "A missionary. I have lived among the Otokauto, the water keepers, for 10 years. I write this in desperate hope. Clayton Reed's mining company has overrun these mountains. Many of the tribe have been captured and forced into slave labor at his main camp on the Blackwater River. Others, including their spiritual leader, Makawi, are being held separately at an old trading post. Reed is torturing her, trying to force her to reveal the location of the sacred spring." My blood ran cold as I read the next part aloud. "He plans to exploit the spring's power during the upcoming full moon ceremony, when it is at its strongest. The full moon is in 2 days." Nellie's face was a mask of grief and fury. "Makawi, our mother, the heart of our tribe." Kiona spoke rapidly, her gestures sharp and decisive. "My sister says we must split up," Nellie translated, her voice tight. "She and Ayana will go to the main camp. They will scout it, look for a way to free our people. You and I, we will go for our mother." It was a desperate, insane plan. Splitting our small group felt like a mistake, but Nellie was right. Time was running out. "Where would he keep her?" I asked. Nellie pointed to the map Sullivan had given me, to the remote, fortified location he'd mentioned, the old trading post. "Then let's go," I said. Ayana gave her sister a small carved bone whistle. "The call of the hawk," she explained, "a signal, so we can find each other again." As Kiona and Ayana disappeared into the forest like ghosts, Nellie turned to me. Her eyes were filled with a terrifying resolve. They go with strength, she said. We go with wisdom. I shouldered my rifle. Let's hope we have enough of both. We were splitting up, heading into two separate traps. The old trading post was a fortress, perched on a high plateau, surrounded by a timber palisade and crawling with armed guards. We watched from a rocky ridge as the sun began to set, counting at least 10 men. Mother is there, Nellie said, her voice a low whisper. I can feel her. As dusk bled across the sky, a group of riders approached the compound. My heart jumped into my throat. Leading them, his hands bound before him, was Reverend Sullivan. They've captured him, I breathed. Just then, Clayton Reed himself emerged from the main building. He strode up to Sullivan, smug and triumphant. They were too far away to hear, but Reed was clearly furious, accusing the Reverend, who stood tall and defiant. Then they dragged him inside. This changes everything, I said. Now we have to get two people out. With darkness, different eyes see better, Naomi said, a promise in her voice. We waited until the moon was high, then circled to the rear of the compound. The palisade wall was steep, but a section of poorly set logs gave us the handholds we needed. We slipped over the wall like shadows, moving through the compound, our hearts pounding with every passing guard. We found the main building, a side door partially hidden by crates. As we approached, it swung open. A guard stepped out for a smoke, mere feet from where we hid. I could feel Naeli's breath, warm against my neck. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He finished his cigarette, ground it out, and went back inside. Now, I whispered. We slipped into a dimly lit hallway. Doors lined both sides. We could hear men playing cards in a room at the far end. The first two doors opened to empty storage rooms. The third held sleeping guards. The fourth was locked. Nellie pressed her ear to the wood. Someone inside, she whispered. Just then, footsteps. A guard was walking down the hall, keys jangling at his belt. He was heading right for the locked door. There was nowhere to hide. I shoved Nellie behind the door and stepped out. The guard's eyes went wide. Hey, who the hell? He never finished. I closed the distance in a single step, and my fist connected with his jaw. He staggered, reaching for his gun, but Nellie was already there, a piece of firewood cracking against the back of his skull. He went down without a sound. We took his keys and opened the locked door. Inside, on a cot, sat Reverend Sullivan. Ethan, he whispered, his face a mask of shock and relief. What in God's name are you doing here? Rescuing you, apparently, I said, cutting his bonds. Reed found out I helped you. His face grew grim. He's gone mad, Ethan. He calls the spring his divine right. He plans to sell the water for a fortune. Where is my mother? Nellie demanded, her voice cutting through the whispers. Upstairs, Sullivan said. Reed's been questioning her for days. She's weak, but she hasn't broken. He hesitated. There's more. Reed isn't alone. His partner is coming, a powerful government official, my own brother, Thomas Sullivan. He's a federal land commissioner. The betrayal was staggering, but Nellie was already moving. Talk later. Free mother now. Two guards, end of the upstairs hall, Sullivan said. We need a distraction. He glanced around. The storeroom at the back. It's full of blasting powder for the mines. Can you do it? I asked. A grim smile touched his lips. I was an artillery officer before I found God. I can manage. We positioned ourselves at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. The explosion shook the entire building. Men poured out of the card room, running towards the back, not even glancing our way. Now! I hissed. We raced upstairs. Two guards stood outside the last door, looking confused. I didn't hesitate. My pistol barked twice. They went down, wounded but alive. Nellie snatched the keys and threw open the door. Mother! Her voice was thick with emotion. Inside sat an old woman. Her hair was gray, her face lined with hardship, but her eyes were just like Naeli's, bright, intelligent, and unbreakable. Her name was Makawi. She spoke rapidly to her daughter. Naeli's face went from joy to horror. We must hurry, she told me, her voice trembling. It's too late. Reed already knows the location of the spring. He tortured another of our elders, forced him to talk. The whole rescue, it was for nothing. Shouts erupted from downstairs. They'd found the unconscious guard in Sullivan's empty cell. Our time was up. Backstairs, I urged, but Makawi pointed to a window at the end of the hall, speaking quickly to Nally. An old trader's rope, Nally translated, hidden in the attic space. I held off the guards at the stairwell while Nayeli retrieved the rope. They secured it to a beam. Makawi, despite her weakness, went down the rope with a surprising agility born of a lifetime of survival. Nally followed. I was about to go last when the door burst open. Two guards, guns raised. I fired, hitting one, then dove through the window, grabbing the rope as bullets splintered the frame around me. I hit the ground hard. "Stop right there, Blackwood." Clayton Reed stood 20 yards away, a rifle aimed squarely at my chest. Beside him, two of his men held a bloodied Reverend Sullivan. "I'm impressed," Reed called out, his voice dangerously calm. "Quite the heroic effort. Unfortunately, it ends here." I stepped between him and the women. "Let us go, Reed. You don't need them anymore. You have the location." "But I don't have the ceremony," he sneered. "Without the old woman's ritual, the water is just water. Now step aside or I'll shoot your preacher friend." To his credit, Sullivan didn't flinch. "You won't find what you're seeking this way, Clayton." "Silence!" Reed snapped. He leveled the rifle at me. "Final chance, Blackwood." Suddenly, behind me, Makawi began to sing. It was a low, haunting melody that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Nayeli joined in, her voice weaving a harmony around her mother's. The sound was ancient, powerful, and utterly mesmerizing. "Stop that noise, mind it!" Reed demanded, but the song only grew stronger. "I said stop!" he screamed, raising his rifle. And that's when it happened. A sound like a rushing wind filled the compound, though not a single leaf stirred on the trees. The torches that lit the yard flickered wildly. Then, one by one, they went out. The world was plunged into a deep, profound darkness, broken only by the silver light of the moon. In the chaos, Nellie grabbed my hand. "Come!" Shouts and curses erupted behind us. Wild shots were fired, but they went wide in the sudden dark. We scrambled over the palisade wall and melted into the forest, the sounds of Reed's collapsing operation fading behind us. We ran until our lungs burned. When we finally stopped, Makawi sank onto a fallen log. "What was that?" I panted. "The wind. The lights." "Spirit help," Nellie explained simply. "Mother called to the ancestors. They answered." I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I knew we were alive. "We left Sullivan," I said, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. "Mother says the God-man has his own path," Nellie translated. "We could not help him. Now we must go to the sacred spring. Reed will go there for the full moon tomorrow night. We must be there first to protect it." "What about your sisters and your people at the main camp?" "They will know," she said with unshakable certainty. "They will meet us at the spring." She looked at me, her eyes seeming to glow in the moonlight. "And you must come too. The man saved by water has a role to play in what comes next." I looked at her mother, at the impossible night we had just survived. My old life was a distant memory. This was my path now, for better or worse. "Lead the way," I said. Reed's voice echoed in my mind, a ghostly promise from the darkness. "You can't protect it, Blackwood. The spring is mine." We traveled through the night, Makawi setting a relentless pace. As dawn broke, we crested a ridge, and I saw it. A hidden valley cupped between towering peaks like a secret whispered by the earth. A still, perfect lake mirrored the sky, and at its edge a series of terraced pools were fed by a waterfall that seemed to spring from the living rock. The place hummed with a power that I could feel in my bones. "The sacred spring," I breathed. "Home," Nellie corrected softly. We descended into the valley. Hidden amongst the trees were simple dwellings, built into the hillsides, now empty and silent. Signs of a hasty abandonment were everywhere. The hawk's call, their arranged signal, echoed from the trees. Moments later, Kiona and Ayana appeared. The reunion of the four women was a thing of raw, beautiful emotion that I felt privileged to witness. "Our people at the camp," Nali translated after Kiona's urgent report. "They will be freed tonight. The missionary, Daniel, has a plan, but we have a bigger problem." Makawi, the old woman who had seemed so frail, now stood with an aura of immense power. She spoke, and Nili translated, her eyes fixed on me. Mother says you have a role to play in the protection ceremony tonight. The man marked by water must stand with us. You must complete the circle. Me? I was a rancher, a man who believed in dirt and sweat in the solid weight of a rifle in his hands. What could I do in a spiritual ceremony? The sacred water chose you, Nellie explained, her voice gentle. It marked you, connected you to us, to this place. Tonight, that connection must be honored. My hand went to the scar on my arm. Ever since entering the valley, it had been tingling, a persistent, humming awareness. I looked at the four women, their faces filled with a desperate, ancient faith. They believed I was a part of this. And after everything I had seen, maybe they were right. I'll do whatever is needed, I said. The rest of the day was a blur of ritual preparation. As the sun began to set, the full moon, huge and white, rose over the eastern peaks. The time was near. Then a warning call from a sentry on the ridge. Riders, Kiona hissed. Many men. I grabbed my rifle and scrambled to a vantage point. It was Reed. At least 15 of his men, riding down the single trail into the valley. He had come sooner than we expected. The ceremony must begin now, Nally said, her face grim. You must help Mother and my sisters. I will hold them off. No, I said, my voice firm. Your place is there. I nodded toward the sacred pools where Makawi had begun to chant. This is my place. I'll deal with Reed. I found a defensible spot among the rocks, a clear line of sight down the trail. I was one man against 15. The odds were impossible. But as the women's song rose behind me, a strange calm settled over me. Reed and his men reached the final switchback before the valley floor. I raised my rifle, took aim, and the world changed. The air began to shimmer like heat off a summer road. The women's song grew, seeming to come from the land itself, and then the sacred pools began to glow. It was a soft, ethereal blue light that pulsed in time with the song. The light spread, tracing the streams, the lake, until the entire valley was a network of living, breathing light. Down on the trail, the horses panicked, rearing and refusing to go forward. Reed, furious, dismounted and tried to walk, but it was as if he hit an invisible wall. He raged, he shouted, but he could not take another step into the valley. The sacred place had closed its doors to him. As the ceremony reached its peak, a sharp, searing pain shot through my arm. I looked down. The scar, the mark the water had left on me, was glowing with the same brilliant blue light as the pools. The pain became a wave of pure sensation, a feeling of being connected to everything, the rock, the water, the sky, and the four women whose faith had made this miracle happen. I understood. I was a part of this. The water had made me a part of this. As the light began to fade, Nellie approached me. It is done, she said, her voice filled with a quiet triumph. The sacred place is protected. Reed cannot enter. We watched as Reed and his men, defeated and confused, retreated back up the trail. It seemed we had won. The valley was safe. But the next morning, as the freed members of her tribe began to trickle back into the valley, a lone figure appeared on the ridge. It was Daniel, the missionary, and the look on his face told me our victory had been short-lived. Reed is gone, he said, breathless from his run. But he hasn't given up. He's on his way to Fort Bridger. He's used his government connection, Thomas Sullivan. He's filed official papers claiming this valley is home to a band of hostile insurrectionists. Daniel took a deep, shuddering breath. He summoned the U.S. Army. They're 2 days out, with orders to clear this valley by force. The tribal council gathered in a natural amphitheater by the lake. The mood was grim. The options were few: fight a hopeless battle against the U.S. Army, or abandon their sacred home forever. Then Makawi, her voice carrying the weight of generations, asked me to speak. The man marked by water. The man who stood between two worlds. All eyes turned to me. I can't tell you what choice to make, I began, Nellie translating my words. But there may be a third path. Reed is using your laws against you, I said, looking at the elders. Perhaps we can use those same laws against him. The idea was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was better than no shot at all. Daniel the missionary agreed. He had connections to newspapers in the East. I had a name that, while reclusive, still carried some weight in the territory. The plan was set. I would ride to Redemption Springs with Nayeli and file an emergency injunction with the visiting territorial judge. Daniel would begin writing letters, telling the world the truth of what was happening in this hidden valley. The ride was hard and fast. We reached Redemption Springs at dusk and sought refuge with Harold Miller, the old store owner and a friend of my father's. He confirmed the judge, a man named Parker, was in town. He agreed to take a message. While we waited in a cramped storage room above the store, I looked at Nayeli. You know, I said, a week ago, my life was just quiet, empty. And now? She asked, her dark eyes searching mine. And now it's anything but. Judge Parker agreed to see us. He was a small, wiry man with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. We told him everything. The kidnapping, the forced labor, the false claims, the threat of military action. He listened, his face unreadable. These are serious allegations, he said when we finished, and Mr. Reed is a very powerful man. My hope began to fade. However, the judge continued, I am deeply troubled by the misuse of military authority and the disappearance of Reverend Sullivan. He took out a pen and paper. I cannot issue a full injunction, but I can issue a temporary 14-day stay of action. It will order the military to stand down pending a full investigation. It was a reprieve, a fighting chance. We had won. But as we were leaving the hotel, keeping to the shadows, we overheard a group of Reed's men, drunk and loud, stumbling out of the saloon. Reed says the judge signed some papers, one of them slurred. So what? Another laughed. Papers burn, and judges can have accidents. My blood ran cold. Reed already knew, and he had no intention of obeying the law. He was going to murder a federal judge. We were about to race back to warn Parker when a voice stopped us. Well, look who's come to town. It was Clayton Reed. He stood at the end of the street, flanked by 4 of his men, their hands resting on their pistols. You've been remarkably troublesome, Blackwood, he said, his voice a low purr of menace. Return the woman to me, and I'll forget this whole unfortunate business. Refuse, and you'll never see the sunrise. The injunction will get lost, and the good judge will have a tragic accident on the road. The threat was naked, absolute. He was going to burn it all down. Nellie stepped forward, her chin high. You seek the sacred water, she said to Reed, her voice ringing with power. But the water judges the soul, and yours is too corrupt to touch it. Philosophy from a savage, Reed sneered. Take them. As his men moved in, Nellie dropped to one knee and pressed her palm to the dusty street. She began to sing, that same haunting melody. The ground beneath Reed's men trembled and shifted, throwing them off balance. It was just for a second, but it was enough. Run! Nellie yelled. We sprinted through an alley, the sounds of gunfire and angry shouts behind us. We made it to the stables, but 2 of his men were waiting. As they raised their pistols, Nellie threw a handful of powder from her pouch into their faces. They screamed, clawing at their eyes. We thundered out of town, leaving chaos in our wake. He's going to kill the judge, I yelled over the sound of the hoofbeats. We cannot go back, Nellie shouted. Then we go forward, I decided, turning my horse north. We ride for Fort Bridger. We'll warn the commander himself. It was a desperate, punishing ride through the night. We arrived at the fort at dawn, exhausted and covered in dust. We talked our way past the sentries and into the office of the commanding officer, Colonel Hargrove. He was a stern, by-the-book military man. He listened to our wild story with a skeptical frown. He had his orders, signed and sealed. Those orders are based on lies, Colonel, I pleaded. Reed's partner is Thomas Sullivan, the land commissioner. At the mention of Sullivan's name, something flickered in the colonel's eyes. I've had dealings with Commissioner Sullivan before, he said slowly. Not all of them straightforward. That was the opening we needed, he agreed. He would delay the detachment's departure for 24 hours to await the judge's official courier. And he would send a patrol to find Judge Parker on the road and provide him with an escort. We had done it. We had bought them time. But as we rode back towards the valley, a hawk's cry echoed through the trees. It was Kiona's warning. We found her on the ridge, her face grim. "Reed's men," she said in her limited English. "They come. All of them." Nellie spoke with her sister, her face growing harder with every word. "Reed knows about the military delay," she translated for me. "He's not waiting. He has gathered every man from his mining camps, nearly 50 of them. He's going to take the valley by force himself. Before the army can get involved, they will be here before sunset." Reed's plan was brutal and direct. Overwhelm the tribe with sheer numbers and firepower, seize the valley, and present the army with a done deal. The tribe could never win a straight fight, but Reed had a fatal flaw: his greed. "He can't see the sacred pools," I said, an idea sparking in my mind. The ceremony concealed their magic from him. "He sees only an ordinary valley," Nellie confirmed. "Then we give him an ordinary battle," I said. "A diversion." The plan was simple and incredibly dangerous. We would make Reed believe the sacred spring was on the opposite side of the valley, at a small, defensible canyon fed by a normal stream. Most of the tribe's warriors would stage a fake, desperate defense there. It had to look real. It had to draw in all of Reed's men. Meanwhile, Kiona and Ayana would lead a small team to rescue Reverend Sullivan, who Reed was parading at the front of his column as a human shield. Makawi and Nayeli would remain at the true sacred pools, preparing another ceremony, a final, desperate gambit if our plan failed. As the sun touched the western peaks, Reed's men poured into the valley. The trap was set. The battle was chaos. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls. Our warriors fought with the courage of cornered lions, making Reed pay for every foot of ground. I was positioned on a high ledge, my rifle cracking, picking off his men one by one, trying to slow their advance. Reed was getting frustrated. This was taking too long. He dragged Reverend Sullivan forward. "Tell them to surrender," he bellowed, "or the preacher dies." He held a knife to Sullivan's throat. Across the small battlefield, he could see Makawi and Nayeli, who had come to observe. He thought he had them trapped. He thought he was in control, but he had made a terrible mistake. He had brought his greed and his violence into a sacred place, and the sacred place was about to answer. Makawi began to sing. Nayeli joined her. It was not the song of concealment. It was something older, deeper, a song of the earth itself. The ground began to tremble. Not just a shift this time, but a deep, groaning shudder. Reed looked confused, then angry. "What is this devilry?" A crack appeared in the dry stream bed at his feet. It widened, snaking its way up the canyon. Then from the fake spring, the small, ordinary stream we had chosen for our diversion, came a roar. It wasn't a trickle. It wasn't a stream. It was a wall of water, a flash flood born from nothing, a furious, churning torrent that filled the narrow canyon in seconds. It was a memory of the flood that had started it all, the water's judgment. Reed's eyes went wide with terror, a final fleeting understanding of the power he had tried to steal. The torrent slammed into him and his men, sweeping them away in its fury. The sound of the water and the screams was soon replaced by a profound, ringing silence. The rest of Reed's men, seeing their leader and his inner circle consumed by the earth itself, threw down their weapons and surrendered. It was over. The next day, the U.S. Army arrived. They found no hostile tribe. They found a peaceful community, a captive minister, and a group of 30 captured outlaws. Their story of a supernatural flood so insane that the official report would later call it a landslide caused by a freak rainstorm. With the testimony of Reverend Sullivan, Daniel the missionary, and Judge Parker, the full extent of Clayton Reed's crimes came to light. The federal government, embarrassed and facing a potential scandal fueled by Daniel's newspaper articles, had no choice. They officially recognized the Otakauto tribe's claim to the valley. The land was theirs, forever. I stood on the ridge overlooking the sacred pools, watching the tribe celebrate their newfound peace. My ranch, my old life, felt like a story about someone else. Nellie came and stood beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of everything we had been through. "Mother says the man marked by water has a place here," she said softly, "if his heart chooses." I looked out at the valley, at the families reunited, at the children playing by the glowing pools. Then I looked at her, at the woman who had been pulled from the brink of slavery, who had faced down evil with a strength I could only admire. The woman who was connected to me by a bond I was only just beginning to understand. My father had always said we were descended from hawks, patient hunters. For years I had hidden on my ranch, patient for nothing, hunting for nothing. Now I understood. I hadn't been hiding. I had been waiting. "Tell your mother," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, "that my heart has chosen." She smiled, a true, brilliant smile that felt like the sun rising after a long storm. "Welcome home," she said, "son of the water." The circle was complete. The man who had lost his family to the water had found a new one because of it. And in the heart of the wild, untamed West, a new story had just begun. If you were moved by the story of the water keepers, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the spirits of the Old West have many more tales to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one.